When you're knitting, I think it's always really good to occasionally push yourself outside of your comfort zone. That doesn't have to be by working a super complicated knitted pattern. It could be something as simple as colour. Pastel pink is not a colour that I'm generally drawn to working with. It's lovely, but it just never shouts at me from the shelf when I'm buying yarn. However, I know lots of you love to work with the traditional pastel colours, so when I cast on this blanket, I decided I'd push myself outside of my comfort zone, and I chose this really lovely pink to work with. I'm naming this design Emma, and I think the pastel pink that I chose actually really works well with the neat straight lines of the pattern that the middle panel produces. And actually by the end of the blanket I was really enjoying knitting with the pastel pink. So it turns out that pushing myself out of my comfort zone really worked and opened my eyes to a whole new range of colours that I can choose when I'm knitting a project in the future. Emma is a 20 row repeat, so she is at the longer end of the pattern repeats that I like to tackle for these blankets, but it's a lovely rhythmic repeat, and as always I'm going to walk you through every single row so that you feel confident in going away and knitting the rest of the blanket yourself. To knit a blanket the same size as mine, which is 60 centimeters wide by approximately 80 centimeters long, you're going to need 400 grams of double knit yarn. You may also know this as 3-weight yarn or light worsted weight yarn. You are also going to need some 4mm circular needles, and the right length for a blanket this size is about 100 or 120 centimeters. You're going to need some embroidery scissors to cut your yarn, and then optional but very useful is 2 stitch markers, and we use these stitch markers to mark where our garter stitch border ends and our middle panel starts. So without further ado, grab some yarn, grab your needles, and let's get knitting. When I knit a blanket that has a built-in border of any sort, I like to cast on the stitches for the middle panel first and then count my border stitches separately, so I don't count them as part of the overall pattern repeat. So the pattern multiple for Emma is 14 plus 6 for the main middle panel, and then after you have cast that multiple on, you would add another 18 stitches onto your cast on, and that is 9 stitches for either edge of your garter stitch border. For Emma, I cast on a total of 136 stitches. That is including the 18 stitches for the border. So if you want to just replicate my blanket, you can go ahead and cast on 136 stitches. But if you're wanting to adjust the size at all, you would cast on a multiple of 14 plus 6 and then add on your 18 stitches for your side borders. Today I'm just going to knit a very small sample, so I'm going to cast on a total of 52 stitches, but you can go ahead and cast on as many stitches as you like. As always, I like to use the long tail cast on method for all my blankets, but please feel free to use a different method if that suits you better. After the cast on, the first part that we work is the bottom garter stitch border, so we need to work 15 rows in exactly the same way. You are going to work these as follows. You're going to just knit every single stitch until you have 1 stitch remaining on your left hand needle. Instead of knitting this final stitch that's left on our left hand needle, we're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. And the way I do this is I pop my working yarn to the front of my work, and then I'm going to slip my right hand needle into the stitch as if to purl, so from right to left, not from left to right. So just pop the needle in, and then once it's firmly on the right hand needle, you can remove that left hand needle, and the last thing that you want to do is to lift that working yarn to the front of your work so that you don't accidentally create a new stitch. So that's row 1 done, and what you want to go away now and do is knit another 14 rows so that you've worked a total of 15 rows. After your 15th row, your work should look a little bit like this, and we are now ready to jump into our 20 row repeat. At this point, you're going to want to grab your 2 stitch markers, because the first time we work row 1 of our repeat, we're going to do a little bit of setup work to get these stitch markers in place. Row 1, you want to start by knitting the first 9 stitches. Grab the first of your 2 stitch markers and just pop it on your right hand needle. Then you want to carry on knitting across until you have 9 stitches left on your left hand needle. Then grab the second of your stitch markers and pop it on the right hand needle, and then knit 8. And that final stitch, instead of knitting it, we're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front, just like we did for the bottom garter stitch border. Row 2, you start with knitting the first 9 stitches. Slip the marker over and then purl 6 stitches. Then until the next stitch marker, you want to repeat the following 7 stitches. You want to knit 1 and purl 6. That's knit 1 and purl 6, and you should hit your second marker after a purl 6. Slip that second marker over and then knit 8. And then the final stitch you're going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 3, and actually every odd numbered row in this project, is really nice and easy. You are going to knit every single stitch, slipping the markers as you go, and the only stitch you are not going to knit is that final stitch of the row, and that stitch you are going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front to create that nice braided edge up your long sides. Row 4 starts with a knit 9. Slip the marker over and then purl the next 6 stitches. Then you want to repeat knit 1, purl 6 all the way across until you hit your second marker, and that should be after a purl 6, so it should fall in pattern. Slip that second marker over and knit the next 8 stitches. And then finish the row by slipping that last stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 5, knit all the way across, slipping the markers as you come across them, and then instead of knitting that final stitch, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 6 starts with a knit 9. Slip the marker over and purl the next 6 stitches. And then you want to work knit 1, purl 6, and repeat that pattern of 7 stitches until you hit your second marker, and that should be after a purl 6. Slip that second marker over and then work knit 8, and then the final stitch you're going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front instead of knitting it. Row 7, just like the other odd numbered rows, is just a row of all knit stitches with the exception of the final stitch, and that stitch you always slip purlwise with the yarn in front. Slip your markers over as you come across them, but apart from that, every stitch except the last one is a knit stitch. Row 8 starts as always with a knit 9. Slip the marker over and purl 6. And then your pattern repeats until the next marker for this row is slightly different. You are going to work knit 8, purl 6 all the way across. So that's knit 8, purl 6 until you hit your next marker. Slip that second marker over and then work knit 8, and the final stitch after the knit 8 you're going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 9, knit all the way across, slip your markers as you come to them, and then instead of knitting that final stitch you just want to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 10, you want to start by knitting the first 9 stitches. Slip the marker over and purl the next 6 stitches. And then you want to repeat the following set of stitches until you hit your second marker. You are going to knit 8 and then purl 6, and you should hit your marker after a purl 6. So that's knit 8, purl 6, and you should hit your marker after a purl 6. Slip the marker over and knit the next 8 stitches. You should be left with 1 stitch on your left hand needle to work, and instead of knitting it you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 11, nice and easy again, you're just going to knit all the way across with the exception of that final stitch. The final stitch you want to slip purlwise with the yarn in front, and don't forget to slip those stitch markers over from your left needle to your right needle as you hit them. You start row 12 by knitting the 9 stitches before the marker. Slip the marker over and purl the next 6 stitches. And then you want to repeat the following 7 stitches until you hit your next marker. You're going to work knit 1, purl 6, and if you've counted your stitches correctly, you should hit your next marker after a purl 6. Slip the second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. That final stitch of the row, you're just going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front, and that's row 12 done. Row 13, knit all the way across, slip the markers as you come to them, and then instead of knitting the final stitch, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 14 starts with knitting the first 9 stitches. Slip the marker over and purl the next 6 stitches. Then you want to repeat the following 7 stitches until you hit your next marker. You want to work knit 1, purl 6, and if you count your stitches correctly you should hit your second marker after you have worked a purl 6. Slip that second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. That should leave you 1 stitch left to work, and instead of knitting it you're just going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. By now you should be able to do your odd numbered rows without really thinking, but for row 15 you're just going to knit all the way across with the exception of the final stitch. That one you want to slip purlwise with the yarn in front, and don't forget to slip those stitch markers across as you come to them. Row 16, you want to start by knitting the first 9 stitches. Slip that stitch marker over and then purl the next 6 stitches. And then you want to work across your row until your next stitch marker, and you want to repeat the following 7 stitches. You want to knit 1 and purl 6, and then if you have counted your stitches correctly you should hit that marker after a purl 6. Slip the marker over, and then for the last 9 stitches you are going to knit the first 8 of them, and then the 9th and final stitch you are going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 17, knit all the way across, slip your markers as you hit them, and the only stitch we work differently is that final stitch of the row, and instead of knitting that stitch we're just going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. By now the odd numbered rows should feel super familiar. If there's a row that requires a little bit more concentration, then it is row 18, and also then subsequently row 20, because they are the same. So row 18 still starts with a knit 9, slip your marker over and then knit 7. After that knit 7 you are going to purl 6. Now you want to repeat knit 8, purl 6 until 7 stitches before your marker. So it does involve a little bit more attention paying to when your marker is coming, but if you do that correctly, you should hit 7 stitches before your marker after a purl 6. So just keep an eye on how many stitches you have left here after each of those purl 6s. So that's knit 8, purl 6 until 7 stitches before your marker. The final 7 stitches before your marker, you are just going to knit. Then you're going to slip that marker over and knit 8 more stitches. And then you're going to finish the row by slipping the final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 19, knit all the way across, slip those markers as you hit them, and then instead of knitting that final stitch, slip it purlwise with the yarn in front like we've been doing for every row during this project. Row 20, the final row of our repeat, starts with a knit 9. Slip the marker over and then knit the next 7 stitches. And then go ahead and purl the 6 stitches after that. Then you want to go ahead and work knit 8, purl 6 until 7 stitches before your second marker. You should hit that point after a purl 6, so you just want to check how many stitches you've got left after each purl 6. So that's knit 8, purl 6 until you've got 7 stitches left before your second marker. Those 7 stitches before the marker, you just want to go ahead and knit them. Slip that marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches, and then finish the row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Now that is the 20 row repeat that you would go ahead and work until your project is about 10 centimeters shorter than you want it to be. The reason for that is so that we get one of these entire rectangles top and bottom in each of the corners. You want to work as many repeats as you need to for your size of blanket. In my case, that was 11. So I just counted 11 of these blocks here. And then after I've worked 11, or however many you work in your situation, you need to work rows 1 to 17 once more. So you leave out the final few rows that create these garter ridges to complete this rectangle here. So go away and knit however many repeats you feel you need to for your project. If you are replicating my blanket, then go ahead and knit 10 more so that you can count 11 of these blocks along your long edge. And then work rows 1 to 17 once more and stop after you have worked row 17 and come back and I will talk you through this top edge. Your project will obviously be much bigger than mine. I just have the one repeat before doing my rows 1 to 17, but after finishing row 17, the front of your work should look like this. You should have your numerous blocks running up the edge, and then you should have one final set of blocks without the little garter stitch ridges at the top. And at this point we are ready to start our top garter stitch edging. It's worked in exactly the same way as the bottom garter stitch edging, so it's really nice and easy. To work your garter stitch border, you are going to work 15 rows in exactly the same way. So you are going to knit all the way across with the exception of the final stitch, and the final stitch you are going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. For this first row, you can remove your stitch markers as you go because we don't need those anymore. So now you want to go away and knit 15 rows where you knit every single stitch with the exception of the final one. That one you're going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. So essentially it's 15 rows of garter stitch, and the only thing that makes it not garter stitch is the slipping of that final stitch. After those 15 rows of garter stitch for your top border, you should have a piece of work that looks a bit like this. You should have your 8 garter ridges at the bottom, for your bottom border. You should then have your nice middle panel, and then you should have 8 matching garter ridges at the top here for your top border. And then the very last thing that we need to do is to cast off our work so that we can get it off our needles and have a finished project ready just for the ends to be sewn in. The cast off we're going to work today is a basic knitted cast off. I am going to go through it very briefly in this video, but I do have a video that goes through it in much more detail that I will link here now. So if you are new to the knitted cast off, then perhaps go and take a look at that video before you tackle casting off your blanket. So the golden rule of the knitted cast off is that you never have more than 2 stitches on this right hand needle here. If you do, you've gone wrong and you need to backtrack. So we start the cast off by knitting the first 2 stitches. You want to keep your tension fairly relaxed for these stitches, because if they are too tight, then you'll find that your top edge scrunches up and doesn't lay flat. Once you've knitted those 2 stitches, you want to pop your left hand needle into the first of the 2 stitches that you knitted and pick it up like this. And then you want to lift it over the second stitch you knitted and slip it off your right hand needle. So you've actually dropped it completely off the needle and it has looped over the second stitch you knitted as you dropped it off the needles. So you've gone from 2 stitches on this right hand needle to 1. Now we need to go back to 2 stitches, so you knit 1 more stitch and then you repeat the process of grabbing the first stitch that was on the needles and lifting it over the second stitch. And you want to repeat that all the way to the end of your row until you have no stitches left on your left hand needle to work and you just have this 1 loop left here on your right hand needle. When you're left with just this 1 stitch on your right hand needle, you can break your yarn. You are ready to finish off your blanket. I like to do that by pulling this loop up slightly bigger, getting rid of the knitting needle because I don't need that anymore, and then I just pull my tail through that loop and pull to tighten. Then when you sew in your end, that is not visible at all. As with most of my blanket patterns, Emma is not a reversible blanket. When you work with any sort of stockinette stitch, it's actually really difficult to get a blanket that is reversible. So 9 times out of 10 blankets that use stockinette stitch will not look the same on the front as they do on the back. That being said, the back isn't ugly, it just doesn't look anything like the front. For those of you who like to have written instructions to follow along with, I have a written pattern on my blog and I will link that in the description below. That pattern also recaps all of your pattern multiples and yarn amounts and everything that you need to recreate this blanket if that's what you want to do. And my challenge to you after this video is to pick a colour that pushes you outside of your comfort zone if you choose to knit this blanket. If you don't fancy knitting this blanket, then I'll link one here that you might also like to try. And again, why not push yourself out of your comfort zone and pick a colour that you've never used before? That's all from me for today, and I'll see you again for another video soon.